So this is spiritual grief number 3, and it's all about going from pain to power. We're looking at the Solar Plexus chakra this week, which is our will, or what I like to think of as our dharma, our true purpose. And sometimes that isn't always as easy or as pain-free as we expect it to be. And I certainly think when we're looking at spiritual grief, it can be quite an eye-opener of our true purpose. I know that this is something that I've recently been through, and when I say recently, I mean the past few years, going from where I was when I thought that I was on my soul's purpose, retraining in acting, doing my writing, being a healer, to actually ending up being a carer for my dad for the last few years. And that has been a really difficult process, and I haven't been ready to talk about that before. And because I believe that you go through grief a lot earlier when you're caring for someone, because it's like you're losing them. You're caring for the dying as they're going along, and you can see them change and shift, and you lose parts of them. So it's like a slow grief. And I feel like that's a really important thing to speak about today, that slow grief. So I'm going to go through it as in different stages of what I went through and put it into my own terms. I'm also going to do it with tarot cards, because what I want to offer you as a way to do now, today I was like, I don't even know whether I can speak about this. My journey as a carer for my dad has been quite painful for me, and there's been times when I didn't actually think I'd be okay. I think caring is one of the hardest jobs there is out there, and shifting that balance of your dynamics with your family is incredibly difficult. And I've said this before to friends, that when people go and have children, there's an understanding of like a postnatal depression period. But when you move into being a carer and there's not light at the end of the tunnel, you're seeing someone deteriorate and change and depend on you when they're not used to it, and losing their freedom and getting sick and ill. There's no container for that being a period of depression and grief. And while people can often understand what it feels like to lose a loved one and when they die, what I call the slow death of caring for the dying can be much more, well, maybe not much more, it's all painful, but it can be a very painful, isolating process. So I wanted to put a spiritual, soul-based spin on that to help bring you from pain to power, which is something I've used myself to help me get out of the slump of how painful it can be. So I'm going to apply this to my own journey through cards, and I hope that you can come away, and if you're going through something, it might be caring for a loved one, or it might be something else different on the grief process, but anything that's quite hard and heavy and difficult to see the higher perspective. Now, often I think it's great to work one-to-one with someone, to do soul-based coaching. I've done spiritual grief coaching myself. I do soul work, but often when we're close to it, we need the help of someone else to hold our hand and walk us through it and see the bigger perspective. But if you need a little bit of free assistance today, this is a great tool to use to tap into your higher self and your soul's purpose. So let's start with stage 1. And my stage 1 is the impact of sudden illness and the decline of dementia. So this was a very painful process to me a couple of years ago. And my dad first got, well, it was about a 5-year process when we realised that my dad had dementia. Now, he wasn't diagnosed till very late, a few months back, and now he's passed. So it's been terrifying and a horrible process. One, because he didn't want to talk about it. He didn't want to admit he had an illness, so he didn't want us speaking about it. So it was like this secret within the family, and that puts different pressures on. And it's a really tough illness to go through. I'm sure it's touched the lives of many people. But my biggest fear back then, and was throughout the process, was that my dad was going to forget me. And it triggered an abandonment wound in me that was intense. And I'd seen my granddad had dementia, and he did forget who I was. And I knocked on his door once and went to see him, and he kept shouting at me, telling me he didn't want Avon. And I was crushed. I was like, "Granddad, it's me," and he didn't get it. And I never had connection with my granddad again. I think I was too afraid to see him, and he died shortly after that decline. So I think dementia is an intensely painful disease, but I will say on a higher perspective, which I wasn't ready to talk about at the time, I was working with my soul, the soul of my dad, in a different dimension while he was going through this. And I had the big blessing that he didn't forget me, and he always knew who everyone was, so he didn't have the biggest decline. But I will say that anyone can actually work with the soul of their loved ones. They say when people have dementia, in case you don't know on a spiritual perspective, that their soul's already crossed over the veil, so they're sort of in two worlds. And I certainly saw that with my dad, and I worked with his soul more consciously. And from a soul's perspective, there was a lot of higher wisdom there and a really good connection. And physically, even though I was losing the dad that I used to know, that was very able to do everything, and he lost his ability to do certain tasks, which was really difficult to see. And yeah, I mean, he would forget things, and it was difficult. So we had that, which was like a slow burner going on. And then coupled with that, he got diagnosed with cancer a couple of years ago, but it was very sudden. He got very ill. He wasn't eating. It was on the back of COVID, and he just couldn't get out of bed. And my mum was trying to get him some help, wasn't really getting anywhere with the doctors. And it got so bad that she called me up, and I raced home and took him to emergency care, and we went up to the hospital, and I stood outside for 7 hours trying to get my dad seen. He left at some point because he was sitting in these awful chairs, and he was so uncomfortable. But finally, I think it was about 7 or 8 hours, and it was a time when people weren't allowed in with people, and he had memory problems. It was heartbreaking and quite a traumatic time for the family to go to, because we knew Dad wasn't well and they wouldn't let us in. Very, very difficult situation. And so I feel anybody that's out there going through this process, has been through this process in the past or is going through it now, that it is painful. The slow is what I call slow grief. And I feel that really needs to be honoured, and I hope you don't feel so isolated by me speaking about this today. But in everything, there is what I call a 5D higher self perspective, and that's the soul perspective about what's going on. So what I do to help hear the soul's perspective, especially when something's painful, is to pick a tarot card for each journey. I'm going to navigate 8 of mine with my dad and his illnesses, and to understand it from a higher perspective. So I picked the Chariot card. So I just show that there. And this was me finding a new side to my dad. Basically, this Chariot card shows you a hero that's charging through, blazing a brand new circumstance. And when my dad got this sick, I saw a courage and a bravery and yeah, okay, we'll deal with this. He did get told back then his cancer was terminal, and he was very upset, but he just said, "I will always be looking down on you." And there was a moment when all of my troubles with him just went out of the window. They just dissipated, because I was like, oh my God, this is my dad on his deathbed. And he often would say, and he said this over a few years later because it turned out a little bit differently, "Que sera, sera," which means whatever will be, will be. And he sort of dealt with this really difficult, hard trauma with a real sort of different side to the man that I'd never seen. And I honour his courage through going through such hardships. And I think from a higher self perspective, it was his opportunity to let love in for the first time. Over this period, me and my dad told each other we loved each other, and we'd never said it before. And it was my opportunity to see a softer side of the man that I'd grown up with, who'd appeared to me as quite a masculine, tough around the edges, not asking for help, argumentative, difficult. I had a difficult relationship with him, and this all changed when he got ill. So I feel like, on a soul's perspective, how he dealt with things, the chariot, was also a shift in our relationship. Okay, going on to 2. Okay, so we're now on stage 2, a death sentence and a miracle healing. So my dad was given the prognosis that they couldn't operate on his cancer and that he was on basically palliative care. This was a couple of years ago. And they said it was stage 4 colon cancer. And he was also suffering with hypothyroidism and high calcium at the time. And this was sending him doolally. He was all over the place. He actually thought he was in prison because he didn't know where he was. He was in a very bad way. And it was a very, very difficult time for all of us, for all the family. And I remember just being very traumatized by going to the hospital, traumatized with what was happening. I was in shock. I wasn't able to accept it, and I felt totally thrown by everything that was sort of happening. And it actually happened all around the Lionsgate a couple of years ago. So it felt a very chaotic time for me. And what happened was that I ended up leaning into my soul tribe and asking for help. I desperately wanted to help heal Dad and make things better. I had my faith in a miracle, because I couldn't accept. I mean, there was a very back and forth with all the doctors and the specialists at the hospital. Some were like, no, maybe you can do something. No, we can't. And we just had to tell my dad time and time again he wasn't going to make it. And because of his memory, this was really heartbreaking for us, because you'd have to go through it again. And it was like re-triggering the trauma again and again that, Dad, you're not going to make it. And I remember going home and just laying there and going, I'm going to do a shamanic journey. And it was one time when my dad's calcium was really high, really wasn't well. And I got a gut instinct that I wasn't sure he was going to make it through the night. So I did a shamanic healing, and I said to Spirit, look, I'll try not to be his daughter and hold on to the results. And it was the most difficult healing there was, because I just had to go, whatever's going to happen, I need my dad to be protected. If he's not going to make it through the night, I need someone to be there to escort him and take him safely over. Please protect him. And I was doing all of my rituals and tapping into his energy, and I could see that it wasn't good. And I said, whatever happens, it's for the highest good of my dad, the highest good of myself. I let go of him, but make sure someone's there to carry him over if he's going tonight. And the next morning I went up to the hospital and I spoke to my dad, and he said, I've had the strangest night. And he was like, I was out of it. I was having all these hallucinations, and there was 2 ghosts by my bed. And I told them to go away, that I wasn't ready. And he was having all these vivid nightmares. Now, what had happened in my shamanic journey that I hadn't told him was that I called in his mum and his dad to come and be by him. And they said, whatever happens, we'll be here. And then my dad sent them away. And I laughed, because I always thought that my dad had 9 lives like a cat, because he'd got into quite a few scrapes before. And I've just felt that intuition. I was like, he's not on life number 9. He's going to be okay. And so what happened on a higher perspective is that I called in some friends and some healers, and they did a wonderful healing circle for my dad. And we just prayed for, a miracle to happen. And within a few months, we met a surgeon who decided he'd operate and he'd treat the cancer. And my dad had an operation, and they cut it out. And the operation went really well. It was a bit deeper than they expected. And the prognosis was really good. And he had another surgery on his neck for the hypothyroidism. and that prognosis was really good. So it was amazing to see the power of a healing circle. And then I picked cards to look at the higher reason, and I got the Knight of Cups, and that reminded me that, you know, you're not done with this battle. There's still hope. And I got the Six of Swords. I got 2 for this one, and that felt very much like it's going to be a bumpy ride, but it's not as bad as we anticipate, and we got a better result. And this one was about, if you see here, the cup, the feminine coming in, the healers to come in and help the masculine conquer cancer. So, yeah. And then stage number 3, and this is a big one. Being a carer and putting your passions on hold. So, as it turned out, my dad needed a lot of support because he couldn't remember things. It meant that me or my sister had to go to all of his appointments because it was way too much for my mum, who was doing full-time care, and to navigate all of the medical things that were going on. It was a minefield. So I ended up making the decision to become my dad's carer, which he didn't know. Because he wouldn't have accepted the help. He was a strong, independent man, but my mum really needed the help, and it felt like the only logical thing to do. I was at the time trying to balance my life about building my 5D theatre and trying to spend this time with my dad, and it was taking a lot of me. And I spoke to the job centre, and they were like, well, if you've got this big time commitment, then why don't you become a carer? And I found that a really difficult decision because I love my dad and I knew everyone needed help, but it meant me admitting that I'm going to need to put my passions on hold, what I felt was my life purpose. And I didn't want my dad to be sick. I didn't want him to need a carer. I didn't want to be that carer. I wasn't ready to change my relationship with my parents. I didn't want any of the things that I'd been given in life. So it was a really difficult stage. And I take my hats off to every single carer out there that are caring for family or are doing it as a job when it's so disgustingly underpaid. It's such hard work. And if it is a family member, your heart breaks to witness what they're going through. It is the difficultest job ever. I mean, when I changed careers to be an actress, I thought that was challenging. I thought that meant I had to really get over some fears. That was nothing on being a carer, because a carer meant you had to turn up to these appointments and be scared for your life that they wouldn't be going well, that you couldn't help ease the pain a loved one was in, and that you didn't even know whether you were making the right decisions, and you had to learn everything thick and fast, and it wasn't something you even chose to do. And I say this because, you know, there's often understanding when people have children and the mother can go through postnatal depression, which is an awful and a hard thing to go through, but there's some recognition. When you go through the period of being a carer, it's death to your old life, and you're stepping into a position that you don't necessarily want, and you haven't got a good outcome at the end. It's very unlikely that person is going to get better. They are going to change and shift, and at the end of that, you're going to lose them. So I think it's such a difficult role, and we really need to bring awareness of how difficult it is. But when I was going through it, I couldn't speak about it or connect about it. I didn't feel that there was sort of spiritual groups that were set up to deal with people like me, who was always trying to put a spiritual aspect on what I was doing. But I found it, an incredibly hard time. So I'm sending so much love out there to every carer that walks the earth. And also, I chose a card about that role, and got this one, which is the Two of Cups. And it felt very much like seeing the masculine and feminine come into balance for me. And that was what happened with me and my dad. We suddenly bonded and got much closer, and he ended up relying on me more and respecting my ways of trying to help him, and just, I can feel him saying, "You were a good one," just pouring so much love into that relationship. And suddenly I realised how precious my family was. I guess I'd taken them for granted before because I'd had them, they were there. I was the daughter, I was possibly more self-centred because I didn't have my own family, so I was always doing what I wanted when I wanted to do it. And then suddenly I realised how precious my parents are to me, how precious my family is. And that brought in a level of unconditional love and connection that I never would have had if this thing that I didn't want but happened to me. So on a soul's higher self perspective, it was about getting this bond with my dad that was and is priceless. Okay, so now we go into step 4, which I call Caring My Way, Healing, Herbs and Sacred Oils. And this was a very difficult time navigating cancer. I've witnessed somebody die of cancer before, my nan, but she was very independent, and it didn't hit her so hard, even though she was older than my dad. And my dad was put on chemo, and he got awfully sick. Like, he was raced to hospital twice, and he was in a terrible state. His legs were swelling, his skin was peeling off. He didn't seem like he was going to make it through the night. And, you know, it's quite a detrimental treatment, and you're told to go straight to the hospital if there's anything wrong. So he was raced up there twice. And over this period, I moved in with my parents so that I could take better care of him and monitor it and give my mum some support. But it was a real difficult time because I could see that what he was doing wasn't helping him, and I ended up just getting a big intuition to get him off the chemo, that it wasn't working and it was putting my dad's life in danger. And I spoke to my sister, and she did a lot of research. And at the time when he was in hospital, I remember speaking to a doctor and said, "I just want to speak to a specialist because this doesn't feel like the right thing." And she said, "If you take him off chemo, you'll kill your dad." And I cannot believe she said it to me. And I was like, chemo's killing my dad. So I just want to speak to a specialist about it. We ended up getting a meeting with a specialist, and she said, yes, he should come off chemo. It's not one size fits all. And she respected our decisions and said, "You're right, it's only a 5% help of it coming back, and looking at his health, he's been impacted too hard. He shouldn't have gone on it. I'm really sorry about what he's been through." And that kind of made me transition into questioning everything, questioning cancer therapies. And I wouldn't say don't go that route at all, but I did feel like stepping into what I knew to be true about a more holistic way of living, and to be careful of navigating the dangers of not doing one without the other. And it just changed my perspective, because I guess before I'd always thought, maybe naively, that doctors knew best about health, but actually we all know best about our bodies. And what my dad's body was saying is, no, I can't take this. And also what I know now is that I would have nourished his body on the side. We ended up getting him like herbs, and I was doing energy healings with him, and reflexology and pain massages, and all these things helped him greatly. But I was navigating it coming from behind and catching up because he was so poorly, and I wish that was more factored into the process. So I guess I would advise anybody not to not take medical treatment, but to try and balance it out with what you can do to nourish the body alongside. I mean, preventative would always be better, and I feel like we are moving into a society of like, how can we stop these heartbreaking illnesses from happening in the first place? But I did have a higher self perspective, so I picked a card and got King of Wands, Knight of Wands, no, King, And it turns out this card means a Superman. And I feel that this was my dad. My dad's message to me, that he was a super dad. He was trying out everything and putting his faith and trust in me as the medicine woman and the witch that I was, trying out all these different things that will all come from a place of love. And it made me up my medicine to the world and my beliefs about how we can really nourish the mind, the body, the spirit. And he got to open his mind, and I was firmly out of the closet as a witch to him. And I found out around this time that he had a green pharmacy book. So he had a whole book full of herbs to heal. And I was like, Dad, why have you got this? And he was like, I just picked it up off a market at some point. But later I found out that he actually wanted to be a forager, and we didn't know that about Dad. So I feel like there was the witch and the herbalist in him all along, and I am so grateful that he reignited my passion and love for herbs and the good that they can do you, and alternative medicines and ways we can help the body. And then we get to 5. So stage 5, the dark night of the soul. And this is never pretty. I'm sure a lot of spiritual people have gone through the dark night of the soul, and it tends to happen when you're about to go through a great transition. It's always painful. It's when you're wrestling with an old world and venturing into a new one, and nothing really makes sense anymore. And at this point, it was really painful because my dad didn't get better, and he started to have a lot more pain, and it was stressing out everybody in the family. We were all trying to give everything we could, but it was on the back of COVID, and everybody was struggling with this full-time job with my dad, and he was in pain. He was up all through the night. It was just a really dark period, and I was taking him to lots of hospital appointments, as my sister was. We were taking him to see doctors, and nobody was recognising that he was ill, and he had a history of cancer, but he got tested and they said he had the all clear. They thought he might have arthritis or osteoporosis, and we were just banging our head against the brick wall while he was suffering. And it got to the point where I just felt like I couldn't cope anymore, and I was so anxious all the time, and fear. I used to walk up my parents' pathway to see him, and I just have dread in my stomach because I didn't know how bad he'd be, and I didn't want to see him like this, and it felt a really awful time where there wasn't much help, and there wasn't much space to do anything, to have any space to digest it. It was really, really traumatic time, and it was hard to find the higher perspective in this, and maybe it's because it's fresh, I don't know. But actually what the higher self was over this time period, at some points when my dad did feel a little bit better, we would talk, and this card is like memories, childhood memories, and I got to know memories about him that I didn't even know before. And I guess because somewhere along you know that your time is precious, and because of how precious this was, he started to share with me memories that I didn't know about where he grew up, and things that he liked and things that he went through. And we had a night of bonding. We had some wine and he tried vegan steak. And I'll remember that night as so precious because I really got to know my dad. And then there's the shift in family dynamics. I am responsible in stepping up my healing phase. So I guess this was after the dark night of the soul always comes a golden age, a new awakening, a birth of a new reality. And I guess at this point, something came in me that I suddenly felt fiercely protective over my family. I felt a strong warrior of strength around my beliefs and what was best, and to speak out more about that and to step into care and responsibility more effectively. And I realised that the role reversal of having different family dynamics, I was stepping into where I was always the child. I was now the mother, the crone, the wise woman. So I had to bring in and up level my intuition and step into my truth. And I picked a card for this, which mirrored that, the Ace of Pentacles, the golden stand on your own 2 feet, growing up and becoming yourself, which I guess happens to a lot of us when we go through stages of losing our relationships with our parents. And stage 7 is not an easy one. I call it, I wish I could have saved you, the pain of accepting death. So after months of trying to get my dad help and hitting walls and having no one take us seriously, it got to Christmas time this year that's just gone, and my dad was hardly eating anything. He just couldn't. We realised, this is getting serious. He needs help, and we basically barricaded him into the hospital and refused to let anyone send us home. And they did try. We got sent out, but we brought him back in again, and he was on the starvation list at this point. And that was when we finally got taken seriously that there was a problem. And he ended up going into hospital and not coming out again. And this was a period of a few weeks when the fear really set in that, like I said, that I wish I could have saved him, that I wish I could have brought him healing. There was a beautiful healing circle that took place for my dad, and a lot of hope and love and beautiful witch and healer kindness went into it. And it really did feel like my energy was so helped by that. But what happened was I was going in to give my dad support as a healer and to help him through this transition. What I realised, and grief was kicking in as I realised I was losing him and there was nothing to be done. And a day before he died, he was finally given the prognosis that he had terminal cancer. And it was a really difficult, a really, really difficult time. And I'm still wrestling with that. And I picked a card to get the higher perspective. And I got the 9 of Swords. This looks like quite a dodgy little dance. And I feel when you get this card, it's related to karma and black magic. And I felt that instinctively, that there's sort of a black magic playing out in society that I feel like there's a death spell placed upon us, that we should get old and ill and die. And I don't really think that that's the natural order of things. I don't think we have to fall victim to these illnesses. And when you look at illnesses and you look at what causes them, and they're the same things that is pumped into our food and our skies and our, all the things out there in our society aren't set up to keep us well. They're there to keep us reliant on different medications. And it changed my perspective of everything, witnessing what my dad went through and the limited help he got. Now, I believe wholeheartedly in free healthcare. I believe we should really nourish the system and also look at alternative ways of keeping people well so that we don't have such a burden on healthcare systems. And for me, I really realised that I do think there's been a bit of a dark spell cast around health. And I have to wonder why alternative medicine was taken out of the medical books in the 16th, 17th century. Why was that taken out when the same people that took it out was using that kind of holistic health? So there's definitely some sort of cover-up or problem here. And I feel like witnessing that from someone I loved so deeply has changed my ethos on health and well-being, has made me really feel differently. I was already a holistic healer. I already thought, where's the soul and spirit in medicine? But it made me go one step further. So from a higher self perspective, I'm truly grateful, but it's a very hard lesson to learn. It's like the sword of truth that comes into that. And this brings me on to the final 8th stage of the cycle, where I've just just come out of now. Stage 8, getting my dad to the light, psychopomps and spiritual rescue. And this is truly a step in of spiritual grief and what it's all about. So after the pain of witnessing my dad dying, and in a more clinical, I know he wouldn't have wanted to be in hospital, but I did my best to kind of bring light, bring oils, bring safety, bring nourishment, bring healing sounds into his room. I set about clearing the house that he was in. There was a lot of, I work with clearing the energies of homes, clearing entities and energies of people's physical bodies, and there was pain in his bed where he slept and pain in the chair where he sat. It was a very dense energy, so I went straight into clearing the house, and I was clearing it while he was living there as well, but it felt really hard to move this dense pain because it was so physical in his body. But I was working on this, and I was also working on some of my true work. I'm a psychopomp and a soul guide. And what that means is that I help people to the light. I've often helped people reclaim some of their light back, their soul light. And some of my work has been to helping people up to the light, from people that have stayed, ghosts, spirits, entities that are in the astral realm. We can move them off and set them up to the light. This is what a psychopomp does, or a soul guide, as I like to call it. It feels more right to me. And I decided that I was going to be, there was no way I wasn't going to protect my dad in this way. And I just felt, because I'd said that something felt off, something didn't feel right in his transition, I went heavily into this work of prayer. I was reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead and going through the karmic cycle, as well as I am familiar with the Book of the Dead in the Egyptian book, which is actually called Going Forth into the Light, sending someone up into the light. Now, both of these books, I feel, have a bit of dark magic in them. It feels like some of it is heavy programming to keep people in fear state of what will happen. There's like an indoctrination of you must do this or there's sin. And I have, as I do a lot of past life regressions into ancient Egypt, I know it's a time that it fell. So I think the afterlife period had been compromised there, but that's a whole nother story. And it actually is another story because it's what I'm working on in my second play. But I was like, reading these prayers to my dad and making sure that he got to the light. I'd been with him when he took his final breath, and I felt his pain and energy move up, and it got lighter, but then I felt it come back down into me, and I just wasn't sure that I was like, this doesn't feel like, where was he looking for the light? Did he come and find it here? And so I just did a lot of prayer work and clearing work and psychic attack work for myself, psychic self-defense, because I knew that my energy was really low. I was in grief and doing this quite difficult multi-dimensional work. And eventually on his funeral, everything started to feel lighter. And then we realised that, and I got confirmation through 2 healers and my family, they just felt like, oh, yeah, it's okay, everything's lighter, that dad had gone to the light. And that was the true work and the soul guided work and the higher perspective of everything for the past few years that I had to navigate and go through, and the horror and the trauma of seeing what dad had to witness. But to get him to the light was the ultimate, the goal and the soul nourishment. And I picked that card, this card, the 7 of Cups, and it tells you to pick a cup that pulls your eye. And I came to the rainbow, and the rainbow very much felt like that it was a new beginning, time to work on communication skills, it said. And I find that interesting, because at this point in my journey of grief was when I started the spiritual grief series, and it was time for communication. And after my dad had gone into the light, I felt it very much that he wanted me to speak about these things. He wanted me to be open about dealing with death in a different way, to bring the soul back into the guidance, the ancient wisdom. Not that he was connected to this in his physical, but I'm certain he is in his soul and his spirit. And I know that I am, and that is my true work. So going through this cycle of grief has actually brought me deeper into my work as a soul guide, into my passion to bring true stories about the afterlife forward. I'm very much rewriting some of my first play to honour the soul's journey, and the second play is going to be a deep dive into ancient Egypt and all the dirty juju, I like to call it, that went on down there, and that we guard our souls with our lives because they are that precious. So I hope you have found the cards helpful, and yeah, it's a practice that you might want to dive into yourself, just to help you navigate where you are and the soul's higher purpose. And I'm going to offer a Solar Plexus medication. Interesting, it probably is a medication, a good medication, to help you if you've lost your way to your true soul's dharma, your purpose, your power, and help restore that and get some passion back into the body. And yeah, so all you need to do is get comfortable and receive. So relaxing into your body, finding your still center, your solar plexus chakra right in the middle of your stomach, your core. And breathing into this space, just feeling how strong and centered and connected you feel to the center of your body. And making a really nice earth connected feeling going down into your feet, feeling the earth underneath you, and sending that energy back up your legs, into your root, into your sacral center, and up into your solar plexus. And I want you to take a scan of this center of your body, what should look like a bright yellow sun, and often we're undernourished here and we need more liquid light. So you can just feel golden liquid light open up above your solar plexus and pour into your stomach, giving you all the strength and golden magic you need. And if you can feel any pulls or aching or energy that feels off around your core, release it. Send it away from your body and into a violet flame. If there are any cords or energetic parasites that you've picked up from people, places, things, from the spiritual dimension, release it. You do not consent to anything harvesting your energy. And whilst knowing that grief can lay heavy in our body and emotions can stay stagnant at times in our stomach, let this meditation give you the strength to focus on your personal power. For you are a warrior of the light. And you deserve to have your energy aligned and to be following your soul's purpose. And if, like me, you are a warrior of the afterlife and you travel interdimensionally and you protect souls who reside there, and giving you an extra shielding around this space, golden armour, closing off your energy and sealing in your auric field. And feeling a portal open up beneath your feet, clearing any energy, any stagnant shadows, anything that you don't need. And this vortex is sucking out anything that's not yours, clearing your body. And I'm asking that this solar plexus chakra spins out any dust or debris. And the golden liquid keeps filling up any spaces, any tears, any rips, until this vortex, this sun energy, the solar power is ignited and spinning exactly as fast as you command it to. And you are stepping into your personal power. And from this energized and healthy space, I want you to imagine yourself standing really strong. Through everything that you've been through, that you're still standing with courage and confidence and a realigned purpose for your soul, your Dharma flowing through your body. And seeing this golden grail, a light in front of you, follow that path to where it's calling you to go. And see if it opens up a new dimension, a new possibility that's higher than the 3D paradigm you had to live in and navigate through grief and trauma and heartache. It's the higher solar self. And with no limits, with true alignment with your soul and your inner power and strength, what is it that you'd be doing right now? And just see what happens. See what your soul is sending to you. And with that vision of inner strength, come back into your body, breathing into your stomach. Rolling your shoulders and your hips and opening your eyes. So I hope you've managed to feel slightly more aligned, more powerful, more strong in your own body, and that you've gone from a place of your pain into your power. And this is very much what the solar plexus, our core, calls us to do. And I find that it gets knocked off balance so easily when it comes to caring for loved ones and that journey of heartache. And so I wanted to just finally give a big shout out to all of those that do this journey on a spiritual level. There are so many amazing death doulas out there, soul guides and psychopomps that walk the soul through that transition to the light, that help heal and balance and nourish the body and give tender, loving care to all of those that are sick, dying, are vulnerable, or are lost in any way. Are beautiful spirits and people in society that need that kind of care. We all need that kind of care. I can't think of anything more nourishing than having one of those sitting by your sides. I know many nurses and doctors are also earth angels. They do so much more work than what is in their job role. I know there's so many kind spirits and souls out there. I've been touched by many of them, and it's much of the work that I adore and do and have written about in my play, AWAKEN, and it was the first time I got to know all these roles, and it was also while I was gently doing my own work alongside and not realising that there was names for it. So big gratitude to all of those and for everybody that has the strength to care with a full, big heart. And I hope you feel like your hand has been held somewhat along the line through listening to this, and you can try out the cards for yourself to give yourself a bit more of a higher self perspective. Until next week, lots of love.